That's it.
Hi there. This is Jean Roman with For Dragonflies and Me. Welcome to this week's podcast. As always, I'm super excited to be here sharing gardening, cooking, organizational tips and tricks, chatting about healthy lifestyles, and of course, having conversations with incredible entrepreneurs. Well, many of you might remember my guest, Mr. Tim Travis, owner of Goldner Walsh Garden Home, from my premiere podcast episode. You may also remember that we mentioned we would be doing quarterly Tim and Jean talks about different gardening topics. And so, welcome to our spring episode. Everybody, please help me welcome Tim back as we chatted up today about creating natural habitats and pollinator gardens. Don't worry, you don't need to have acres or a huge background to create one of these beautiful environments. You'll understand why after Tim and I explain how. So, Tim, welcome back. I'm super excited to have you here and having the opportunity to chat about more gardening stuff.
Yeah, well, so am I. Spring has finally sprung.
This is
Took a
true.
while. It was a long winter.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I wonder, so if you watched or listened rather to our first episode, Tim and I were off camera. Well, now we are now doing all of my podcasts on camera, so you can actually watch them at my YouTube channel too. So those links will be in the bottom of this description. So, Tim, why don't we begin
Yeah.
this episode with how to create natural habitats and what that entails? First, why don't I just kind of give a general definition of what a natural habitat includes? So, folks, I'm going to read this. This is a definition. I'm sure Tim could just tell you this off the top of his head, but I'll give you I guess, the formal description that Tim can kind of elaborate. So, generally speaking, a natural habitat includes an area of land and water with specific environmental conditions conducive to a particular plant and or animal species. By conducive, we mean able to support that life, whether it be a plant or an animal. And an example of this might be that might be familiar to some of my listeners, might be a butterfly garden. So if you have created a butterfly garden in your yard, you went to a local greenhouse or garden supply center and asked them what plants were good for attracting butterflies and moths. Well, that would be considered a pollinator garden. And that's really what it boils down to. So, Tim, your beautiful location, all 12 and a half acres of it in the historic district of Pontiac, is a natural habitat all in itself for sure. Have you done anything specifically to attract, any special animals, creatures, insects to that location?
Well, part of attracting all of those animals, bees, butterflies, also have price tags on the plants. So I have a lot of plants here that we sell as a garden store that is a natural for attracting them. But our location here, we have 12 and a half acres. We're also on the Clinton River. So we have a lot of interesting natural topography and a lot of wild areas that are along the edges of the property that we pretty much leave alone just to keep it natural. But on top of that, as I say, we sell a lot of the plants and have them pretty much all season available for customers. But it's amazing how many butterflies and bees and everything that come here. The other part of it is we have a pretty healthy environment here. We don't spray insecticides or fungicides or any of that. We keep the plants pretty healthy that way, and that's important. I think the other thing is really learning about the different types of insects and birds and butterflies, etc. About what's important for them, and it's easy to recreate it in your urban garden or farm garden, whatever you got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if you have not been over to Goldner Walsh Garden Home, friends, you are missing out on a treat. Tim does not just have an expansive, beautiful greenhouse filled with tropical plants and succulents and just beautiful things in general, and a beautiful floral shop and a beautiful gift shop. He has, you have access to those plant areas where the nursery where he has his plants to choose your own plants at the nursery. And so it is a beautiful spot. He has an amphitheater. It again is an event space, which we're going to be talking about in an upcoming episode. But, Tim, can you provide some suggestions to my listeners on how they can incorporate some natural habitats on their properties, be it acres or just, a regular subdivision backyard?
So I want to talk about that because there's a big push on native plants, which is important, but in most urban settings, you don't have native soil there. And so native plants in disturbed soils may not perform as well as some other hybrid varieties of plants. So there's a lot of debate on that. In my opinion, for example, echinacea is a fabulous plant for butterflies and bees, but there's 50 varieties of echinacea that have come out, and it's important that they are considered as an addition to attracting them with the native plants. In my opinion, the best plants are the ones that thrive, not invade. And your soil. If you have heavy clay soils, you're not going to be able to plant a native plant that needs to be in the sandy soil, and also with irrigation, et cetera. So you need to work with plants that thrive. Pretty much anything that blooms that does not have a sterile flower on it will provide habitat for those insects and butterflies and bees and hummingbirds, et cetera. And there's just so much to work with. That's the beauty of it, is you can have an incredibly beautiful garden and attract all of that with pretty much anything that's available on the market these days. But it is important to try to get as much of the native plants in there as possible, because certain insects have adapted to very specific species of plants, and so we have to provide a balance of that. Also color, and you want to mix colors, bright colors, to help attract them as well. But it's really knowing your soil, what does really well, and the conditions. Try not to plant a sun plant in the shade, and those are some basic horticulture aspects, and you will be you'll be a big advertisement for all of these fabulous insects and bees and butterflies that we really need to take care of them.
Absolutely. And you were talking about specific, would you include like a milkweed for the monarch butterfly? I know a lot of people love to incorporate those, and some people consider those ditch weeds, but you can actually buy seeds and incorporate those into your gardens.
Well, and milkweed is a great plant that you brought up, because that is the only plant that the monarch butterfly does feed on and lay their eggs on. We actually have them growing here, and we just let them grow in the garden. Some people might think it looks kind of messy, but I think they're quite beautiful. If you ever see the seed pods open up, that silky seed pod, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree.
But I see that the butterfly is just as beautiful as having a flower, and knowing that we're providing a habitat, particularly something that's needs protection, because the natural habitats all over the country is really depleting. Now, it is so amazing to me that a butterfly in Michigan can fly down to Mexico.
I mean, know. Like, do they even weigh like millionth of an ounce?
Yeah, I can't even run 5 miles, without being totally exhausted. And these butterflies have just an amazing life cycle.
And when you were I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
But we have forgotten about certain plants that they need. And, we've sanitized our landscapes to be everything so neat and tidy, but really that is disrupting a huge part of our ecosystem. So we just need to learn to love some of these plants, like again, the milkweed I find to be a beautiful plant, even though it's growing through some shrubs, who cares?
Yeah.
What
And
it does for the ecology is important.
it does. And, like when you were talking to about not spraying your property, and milkweed, it traditionally has been something that grows in the ditches along the side of the road. If you are familiar with the plant and what it looks like, you can see them often growing in, just the wild. But oftentimes, a lot of communities will spray those ditches and cut them back, for some reasonable reasons, for visibility with traffic, but at the same time, it's disturbing that natural habitat for that insect species. And so, some people may not realize that even planting sunflowers and echinacea or purple coneflower promotes a type of habitat for certain birds as well as insects. I personally, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I need to, clean up my gardens and cut back everything in the fall. And I do that too with most everything. But there's a few things I don't cut back, and my echinacea is one of them. If you ever see the goldfinches, they are bright yellow in the summer. But if you're not a bird watching person, you may not realize that the goldfinch, the males, the yellow ones, actually turn brown in the fall and through the winter as a way of a natural camouflage. And my little finches are always all over those echinacea, and they eat that. So if you're a bird feeder, if you love to feed the birds, when you're buying those black thistle seeds, that is another form of food. I mean, I don't really want thistles growing in my gardens, but I do in, the back of my I left those go, but
that's a different that's a different kind of thistle. But there's a global crisis with insects. People, the insects provide food for the birds, and they also provide pollination processes on whether it's if you go to any grocery store, all of those vegetables are pollinated by bees generally. But we have such a huge crisis with our insect populations because of overuse of chemicals, and on top of that, reduction of habitat. We need
GMO crops.
Mother Nature figures it out. And for example, bats. People don't think about bats as a positive thing, but bats will eat 1,200 mosquitoes an hour.
Yes. You put a bat house up on your garage on the opposite side of your yard if you're anywhere near water. Yes. I mean, there again, it's not just the butterflies and the bees, it's the birds and the bats. And there's other creatures that, we keep. I mean, even again, the possum. I mean, whether you're in a subdivision or in the country, there are possums around, and possums eat ticks. Personally, I don't really like possums, but they eat ticks. They're that's their major
dodo chicken
diet. So
well, again, there's so many plants. Pretty much every plant that has a flower benefits the pollinators, the bees, the butterflies, all that. It's important to have a balance of the landscape and the beauty of it. It's a bonus in multiple ways, and we're missing the boat by, again, doing all this monoculture with the landscaping and making everything neat and tidy and rows of boxwoods and yews and stuff, evergreen. You need a balance, and you need to create a habitat, because that to me is a much more satisfying experience. I've had the opportunity to go to jungles in the Amazon and natural areas that are not disturbed by humans, and I've never had a problem with getting swarms of mosquitoes biting me or flies or anything like that, because Mother Nature is balanced, and they have all the plants and the food there for the insects and the birds and everything to live in its own cycle. But every time we take one element out of that ecosystem, it throws everything off whack.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to rethink about a holistic approach to preserving our environment in multiple ways.
Yeah.
And gardening is the way of doing it. But learning about and creating passion for the creatures out there is going to do it. And unfortunately, there's still not enough food for all the hummingbirds and the bees and everything that we have out there. So it does help to supplement, like you're talking about, feeding thistle. Well, like the hummingbirds, there's so many great ways of supplementing the food that there's not quite enough in the landscapes, with hummingbird feeders, and they also need running water. I mean, we actually sell this. This is a little tabletop fountain that they need that water. How many landscapes have just natural water other than the sprinklers?
Yeah.
And also I love to use suet. I feed suet year round for the birds, because the birds that eat the suet also tend to be eating the insects. So but you need to keep that population healthy, particularly at this time of year when there's really nothing left as far as a landscape to provide the natural food for them. We need to supplement that. And it's also very enjoyable.
I actually have a homemade recipe for suet that was in one of my blogs. Earlier in the year, I did a feeding the birds, because I think it was last fall, maybe December, November-ish. But I'm a huge bird watcher. I have watched the birds and taught my children. We would sit and watch them. And I have a couple bird books that the first time we see a species for the first time, we find it in our bird book and we date it. And, so that we remember that, and definitely make homemade suets. Oh yeah, and like I said, even like with the echinacea, another thing that I have always done is I've always planted a row of sunflowers in the back of my garden. Blue jays are very territorial. They're not always the nicest, friendliest guys to the little guys out there. So I grow a row of sunflowers just for them. And some of the other birds may get at them too, but the blue jays, pretty much, this is our territory. But
right.
Again, aesthetically, is it really pretty? No, it's not. Once those happy yellow faces fade away and the heads tip down and they're brown and they're ugly. But you know what? You got to look beyond that when you want to incorporate those natural habitats for animals and birds and insects. And so sometimes it's got to look a little ugly for a little while, but it's worth it in the long run, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know. Well, of course, then the deer are another problem. We'll talk about that. That's a whole nother subject right there.
Comfrey. When I used to be a farmer's market vendor, deer hate comfrey, and I used to always plant a big comfrey plant at each corner of my gardens, and it did act as somewhat of a deterrent. But really, having a dog in the yard is the biggest deterrent.
Yeah. Okay. That's a real solution there.
Yeah,
so
gotta
going back to going back to the list of plants, there's my problem is I have so many. I'm surrounded by so many of them. I couldn't tell you what my favorites are.
Peonies are mine.
But the main thing is, I think for effect, when you're planting anything to attract, you're planting in your garden, you don't want to just do one of this, because from a distance it just looks like weeds. And from an insect eye, it's not really pulling them in either. So it's better to do clusters of the same plant, so it's a bigger impact visually for those butterflies and birds and insects to find that plant. And it's just much more, again, bright colors do a lot.
Yeah.
But again, it's better to have fewer varieties of plants, but more of each one, just to have a stronger impact.
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about, the the perfectly organized gardens, you know, with the lines of boxwood and the arborvitaes and whatnot. And that's never been my style. You know, my style has always been cottage gardens, which is more along the lines of what we're talking about today, you
Yeah.
know. And so I was thought, you know, I'm going to share with the listeners some of my favorite flowers, and I thought maybe you could share a few of yours. So I broke mine up into annuals and perennials, but so a few of my favorite annuals, and again, my style of gardening is cottage, and I love to incorporate natural elements, you know, statuary that's in stone or metal, from natural elements from the earth. And that's what I like to do. But some of the annuals that I often will use are cosmos, Mexican sunflower, milkweed, verbena, zinnias, and of course sunflowers. And some of my perennials that I prefer are purple coneflower or echinacea, alliums, bee balm, black-eyed Susans, liatris, lupine. Oh, I love lupine. Lavender. Oh, another passion. Really
Yeah.
a variety of mints, phlox, and peonies. And for me, I tend to always be attracted to pinks and purples and blues and whites. Other than sunflowers, I really don't have a lot of yellows or oranges. They're
Right.
just, what about you, Tim?
Well,
In your gardens?
I do more landscaping with trees and shrubs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to balance the annuals and the perennials with some structure in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like Weigela, for example, is a great plant. It has a tubular flower that hummingbirds love.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a plant that generally is not eaten by deer, which
Mm-hmm.
is a whole nother thing I have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Honeysuckles, there's all kinds of different kind of honeysuckles that attract hummingbirds as well. All of these plants that attract hummingbirds also attract bees.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all the same thing. Butterfly bush, fabulous, easy to grow. Again, you can just put it in the edge of property and once it's established, you don't have to water it. It actually likes it dry and hot and sunny.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an absolute magnet for butterflies. And I mean, they're almost hallucinating on the flowers. It's really amazing.
They're beautiful. Yeah.
And then, you know, you also have to think about, different trees, tons of trees with berries. The newer crab apples have small little fruit on it that tend to stay on the tree throughout the winter.
Mm-hmm.
So right now is when they're actually feeding the birds.
Yeah.
The old days, people, had crab apples that we grew up with. They were really messy. They'd have big fruit. They dropped to the ground, and it was just a mess. But the newer varieties are much more resistant to the funguses that they used to get. But the main thing is the fruit is such a year-round benefit. I mean, I think they're attractive in the landscape as an aesthetic issue.
Mm-hmm.
But to see the birds go nuts on them at this time of year because there's no other food out there, it's just a great plant. And then of course there's like serviceberry, which is a native Juneberry. They call it Juneberry because they produce fruit in June. It tastes like blueberries, and they are edible. It's also the first shrub to bloom in the spring. So you have to mix things up.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that's in, all the trees, even oak trees, they all bloom.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think about an oak tree as a flowering tree,
Mm-hmm.
but it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
a lot of people don't
flashy.
realize, even on the maple trees, there are all those little red, like blossom things that are falling off the trees. That was the maple tree blossom. That's its flower.
Right. They're really beautiful, and actually they're very sweet. So they do benefit a lot of the bees.
Yeah.
And so there's, every plant has a flower. There's very few plants that I would say have a flower that doesn't have any benefit, because it doesn't really provide nectar or anything like that. But pretty much any plant that you plant in the garden is going to benefit the pollinators and the birds and all that. So take out as much lawn as you can and start planting a garden. And the other thing is, I love vegetable gardening, but I don't. I like to incorporate vegetables in my garden. So you'll see eggplant next to bunch of marigolds and other plants. And what that does is it actually helps attract the bees to come for the flower, but it also benefits pollinating the vegetables, which is very important.
That's called companion planting, Tim. I'm going to be teaching that.
Okay, well there it is. You labeled what I've been doing, but
Yes.
I actually like certain vegetables. I think they are very attractive. You know, I have a little sculpture in the front. And I just grow a cucumber plant on it,
Oh, yeah.
and it's kind of cool. You know,
Yep.
and it doesn't have to look like a typical farm. You know, it can be. And they have texture, and you know, the bonus is the fruit, but and the vegetable. But why not incorporate that as part of your gardening theme?
Absolutely. Well, you know me, I'm all about vegetable gardening and flower gardening. So in my home at the farm, I had a lot of shrubs that were incorporated as well. This is going to be my first spring at my new home. And so I've already, kind of walked through, it's a smaller garden. I'm sure I'm going to expand it, but I know I have a few things out there that I am happy about. And I can see there's a few things that I'm going to probably shift around and stuff. But right now I'm working on getting our vegetable garden. I just bought a greenhouse.
Oh, good for you. Yeah,
Yeah, I
excellent.
posted it on Facebook. It's just a little one,
Yeah,
just a 6 by 10, but it'll be perfect
yeah.
for me and what I need to do. So we're going to put that
Well,
together.
I'm blessed to have a business where I live in a greenhouse, so
Yeah.
it's really amazing, particularly this time of year.
Well, if you want me
The
to come work
cabin
for
fever.
you 1 day a week, just so I could work in a greenhouse at the end, I'm available 1 day a week, Monday through Thursday.
Okay, well, we'll figure that out.
All
Yeah.
right, I'm
Well,
game.
you have some programs coming up,
I
so that's
know we're going
exciting.
to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
excellent.
we talked about, what type of flowers and the styles of gardening and, incorporating trees and shrubs. And, I talked a little bit about the elements that I like to use. I like stone statues. I love, metal architecture, sculpture pieces. What would you suggest to the listeners? What are your preferences for including any other materials in your garden, hardscaping?
Well, I mean, I love art too, and
Yes, you
it's a very personal thing. So I think that if you find something that you really like and you love, you should buy it.
do.
And whatever taste you have, it's really it adds it's the jewels of the landscape. And but I also look at specific particular trees and shrubs that have very architectural feel to it, like weeping cherries or columnar oaks or that kind of thing. That's I consider that to be garden art as well because they put form in the garden.
Hmm.
So it's not just a gazing globe or a statue, which I also love. It's the whole look when you're standing back. What do you really see? You want to have different textures and heights
Hmm.
and form, and that can be accomplished with the different trees and shrubs and perennials that you use, as well as that favorite little bird bath and obelisk or gazing globe or whatever. Or why not throw a little frog sculpture in there? I have this boxwood hedge at my house, and I have this tiny little frog on a lily pad, just sticking on top of the. It's on a stick, but it's sitting on top of the boxwoods,
Hmm.
and it's unexpected. So that makes it fun. It's no different than having fun art in your own home.
Hmm.
It,
Yep.
it's a reflection of what speaks to you, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I feel like your garden is an extension of your home and in your heart. It's like I've always told, people if they come in my home, "Oh, your home is really beautiful. I love this. I love that." And it's like I've always told people it's like I design my home, I decorate my home for me and my family and what my loves are, what colors I love, my interests. I mean, my home, every wall, there's botanical prints, because my heart is always in the garden, like yours. And so for me, winter
Mhm.
is the hardest time of year. And so with incorporating all those floral prints, all those botanicals in every room in my home, I can still feel that sense of being in my gardens. And so even when I'm going into the gardens outside, I also, again, like to incorporate those things that I love to also incorporate in my home. And so I couldn't agree with you more. The garden is just the extension of the home. The home is just an extension of the garden.
But in the garden, there's also a winter garden.
Yes,
For
there is.
example, one of my favorite trees is a paperbark maple.
I love paper.
And in the summer, it has beautiful leaves on it and a fabulous fall color. But when all the leaves are off is when you really see the magic of the exfoliating bark.
Mhm.
So that is an extension of art in the garden that you only see in the winter. So it's year round, and you see the weeping form of a weeping beech or something like that. That comes to life at a different time of year to be enjoyed. So I mean, that's nature figured this out a long time ago. Nature is art. It's putting it together in a way which is no different than having a bunch of oil paintings. Which ones work well together? The landscape can do the same thing. And even as we talk about leaving some of the perennials and the annuals, don't cut them back in the winter. Just leave them there so that it provides habitat for the insects and the birds during the winter and the spring. But the other thing it does is when you have like a dried flower of a sedum plant or something,
Or
and then
hydrangea.
Or hydrangea, and then it snows, and those capture the snow in the winter, which is another light bulb that goes off that you didn't think about. But that's just another pattern that you see that changes just with the weather. So we really don't need to keep things so sanitary. You just let it be, and you learn to appreciate what Mother Nature has to see, because very few people know what a seed pod looks like, because we cut them out before the fall. But seed pods alone have their own set of beauty, but not just the beauty, but also the benefit. And so it's just changing our approach to gardening, and learning to appreciate the value of it without putting so much work into keeping it controlled.
Yeah. And, when you really are planning out and designing your garden, taking into consideration winter interest like natural grasses and the hydrangea and sedum and the other, plants that you mentioned, if you have that planned out to a degree, you're going to be able to have a really beautiful winter garden, like you said, and there'll be a lot of visual appeal. And like you said, a lot of the little birds in the winter, they will use some of those as, weather protection from high winds, because there's no leaves on the trees.
Right.
Yeah. But, Tim, I really feel that, we've talked about some incredible things. You and I could just sit on this podcast for the rest of the evening, have a glass of wine, or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
you mean there's other people up there? Yeah.
Right. Oh, no, it's just not me and you.
Okay.
But when would you recommend, obviously certain plants are better suited for fall planting, some are better suited for spring planting. When, we're right around the corner and people are getting ready to bite at, they're biting at the bit. When do you recommend people start thinking about planting trees and shrubs? Obviously, vegetables aren't going to be till the end of May.
Right now.
Early crops. Right now. Okay.
Yeah. We already started our cruise. There's no reason to. The only things that you wouldn't plant would be the temperature sensitive plants like the annuals.
Okay.
But this is a great time to plant, and really you can plant all summer long. You just have to take care of the watering differently if you plant late in the season, but it really doesn't matter.
Okay.
And the idea of fall is the best time to plant. It's a good time, but it doesn't really matter to the plant. Now, certain things like evergreens, you don't want to plant, like an arborvitae, for example. You don't want to plant that too late in the season, because they don't have time to root into the ground before the winter, and you get winter burn. but that's an exception. Pretty much any other plant you can plant at any time. Perennials, I think I would not plant after mid October, only because again they could heave out of the ground over the winter. You want them to root into the ground, but once the ice is out of the ground, you can plant it. Once you can start digging a hole, you can plant. And right now, with the rain and everything, this is a great time to plant.
Yeah, the moisture in the ground is
Plant
just.
pansies right now. Finally, we
Oh,
don't have.
yes. Yep. I'm
So,
excited to stop by the shop here this weekend. So this episode is going to air after my first class at Goldner Walsh. But Tim, did you want to mention anything before we talk about that, about landscaping services or anything?
we are busy. That's all I can say.
So you're booked up.
I am pretty booked up. I mean, if somebody needs, I mean, I pretty much stay local. But the best thing is people should come and see what's available. We have
Okay.
so many cool plants, and they're all coming in starting this week.
Awesome.
But we have great people here that can help answer any questions. And I'm just going to give you a sneak peek on our pansies while we're here.
Can't wait to see them. I'm planning on coming in on Friday.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Oh, that's so happy.
If
Oh,
only you could smell them. It is so amazing right now.
oh,
So
that's
yeah,
such a
that's a
happy
happy
place to
face.
be.
Yeah, yes it is.
Well,
So
Tim, I am always excited to talk to you, whether or not we're on a podcast. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight and thank all my friends, my Dragonfly friends. But before we let everybody tune out, Tim and I have some exciting news. At our last podcast, our premiere podcast, Tim and I shared that we were going to do quarterly talks. Well, in that time, Tim has graciously, and I feel very humbled, has asked me to teach some classes at Goldner Walsh Garden Home. So my first class will be April 8th. This episode is actually going to be airing on April 12th. And but if you're watching me on my podcast as well as YouTube and my blog, you can see my full list of classes. I will be teaching a class there all year, once a month, so right through December. And I know Tim's got some really great events happening towards the end of the year. So you can go to goldenwalsh.com as well as for dragonfliesandme.com and to see those list of classes and to register. So I'll be teaching gardening and cooking, and I'll have my cookbook there. But yeah, so I'm super excited, Tim.
yeah, we do a lot of other events. Just follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and our. I actually have a free concert coming up on May 12th. A friend of mine has a band, and they just love jamming in the greenhouse, so they'll be coming. And that's all posted on our Facebook page, etc. But we do a lot of fundraisers and other fun events here. We have one called Garden Cocktails, and it's a fundraiser for Micah 6.
Okay.
That's a total blast. But yeah, you definitely want to sign up for our events because they always sell out. We do have containers and cocktails coming up. We don't have a date yet, sometime in May, but just keep an eye on us. We have a lot of fun events here, and we're booked for weddings and parties all the time. So we got a lot of activity here. This place dates back to 1890. It's got a lot of history. It's just a really cool, authentic garden store. There's not many left, and you need to support us, and so that we can keep doing what Gene and what we are doing, and keeping the garden alive.
Yep, that's right, Tim. And like I always say, it's all about supporting local and supporting your small businesses in your community. Because when we keep those dollars in our local communities, it comes back to us in so many different ways. And Goldner Walsh Garden and Home has been there for so many years, providing incredible products, incredible service to its community and surrounding communities. And Tim and his staff are so knowledgeable, and they're so thoughtful and so so helpful when you go in there. You just feel like, you feel like you came home, and that's the way I've always felt there. And so, Tim, again, we're
Well, we're
kindred
celebrating
spirits.
we're celebrating our 70th year in business. We're the longest running landscape company in Oakland County, and we're also celebrating the same as Corvette. Corvette is celebrating their 70th year
Oh
too. So
my gosh.
I'm looking for somebody with the 1953 Corvette that we can do a photo shoot in front of my store. If anybody's out there, I'm looking for one just for a photo shoot.
Once we're off air, let's talk about that a little bit. I might have a connect for
Okay.
you. But
Excellent.
anyways, well, we're gonna wrap it up tonight, Tim. And Tim's gonna be back again in the next quarter and talking about more gardening stuff. And I think I'm trying to, he doesn't know it yet, but after we get off this podcast, I have an extra podcast that I need him to do with me. So oh boy.
Okay.
But
Surprise.
he loves it.
Okay.
But anyways, Dragonfly friends, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Tim, again. And if you're not following me at my Facebook or Instagram, be sure to stop over there. Lots of great content. Subscribe here at my YouTube or my blog and my podcast channel here to get lots of great content. So like I always say, friends, be sure to eat fresh, shop local, and have a happy day. And we'll see you again soon.